So leave it up to me to pick another topic that takes weeks to explain and try to do it in 30 minutes or maybe an hour. So I decided to split up into two videos after I was going through the script because there's just so much. So what I want you to take away from this video is the basics of what hormones are. And the basics is what really balance all hormones. Next week, I'll get into more estrogen progesterone balance with fibroids, endometriosis, PCOS, menstrual cycle, things like that. So before I jump in, I can't go any further unless I acknowledge why I'm wearing this pink shirt. Whenever I talk hormones, I always am wearing pink. And the reason why I'm doing that is to pay tribute to the person who taught me more than anybody. His knowledge pretty much made me into the doctor and person that I am today. His name is Dr. Dick Versendaal. And he is the one who started Vervita. He started a technique called contact reflex analysis. And similar to how all of you guys are watching me in this membership, I have hours of him from his daughter, who's a big mentor of mine, from him teaching from the 90s all the way to 2014 before he passed away. And I remember sitting in my apartment in California when I got a hold of all these tapes that I digitized and started putting them on my computer. And I would watch him for hours upon hours. He was the master of clinical pearls, master of it. And so when I do this talk, I can just feel his presence because he was this big Dutch man, very larger than life personality, amazing doctor, amazing healer, unbelievable, right? And he was so big on hormones. He would say that hormones make you see in color. So when he would get up on stage, he'd wear pink sport coats, bright blue. He was always having colors because he said he had strong hormones. And hormones is what he said gives you libido. And nowadays we talk about libido as just sex drive, but to him, libido was everything. It's what gets you through life. It's what gives you a purpose. And so I get the chills when I say it, literally my hair standing up, because I can hear him saying, if you can do anything for somebody, heal their heart and bless them with hormones. And so I'm going to start off this video by talking about him, and I'm also going to end it with a clinical pearl from him as well. So let's start. Why hormones? Why are we talking about hormones? They are so dang important. But Dr. Charlie, why are they so important? The reason they are so important is because they affect everything in your body. Similar to how methylation affects everything, hormones affect everything. Now, what exactly are hormones? Why do they affect everything in your body? They affect everything in your body because hormones are your body's communication system. Okay, that's a big deal. You know, we have like our lymphatic system, which is our garbage can. Our hormone system is how our body communicates. And the one thing is what hormones are messages. That is what they are. It is a message or messages that are sent all day and all night. Now, I looked up different definitions of hormones because I'm always interested because it's never the same definition that you see twice. And so I looked up Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, whatever, just Wikipedia, Google. There was all different ones, but I liked this one the best. And I think it was from Johns Hopkins. Now, in the definition, it will make sense later when I give my 2 cents on hormones, but in the definition is all you need to know. And in the definition is all you need to know and see on how Western medicine totally misses the boat on hormones. So hormones are chemical messages. I'm going to emphasize really important parts. Made from protein and fat used by the endocrine system and glands to control and coordinate your body's metabolism, energy, reproduction, growth and development, and response to injury, stress, and environmental factors. So what is that in a nutshell? It's a control mechanism to keep your body in homeostasis, in balance. It is a control mechanism and a communication system. That is what hormones are. Okay, so that is a clinical pearl. That is how you can explain it to anybody. Now, how does it work? Okay, so say you have endocrine system gland. So say it's your pituitary gland. Okay, it makes a message called a hormone. It dumps it into the blood. The blood takes it to the organ or target tissue. And when that organ or target tissue in your body uses it, it sends a signal back saying, okay, you don't have to send anymore. We got it. We're utilizing it. That, in a nutshell, is how hormones literally work. It's that simple. And it's obviously more complicated as we get through, but if you understand that, you're going to really understand why it is the way that I think about hormones differently. So, what are these glands? I made notes here so that I stay on topic. I'm trying to keep this video to about 30, 40 minutes max. I know people have low attention spans. So the organs and glands that are part of the endocrine system are the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, the pineal gland, the thyroid, the adrenals, the reproductive organs, so your ovaries, testes, prostate, and uterus. Those are the main ones. Now, there's other organs that are actually part of it that release hormones that no one really gives love to. And those are liver, heart, thymus, and I should have thrown in there pancreas because that's also an endocrine system gland. Okay, so of all of those, the biggest ones that you need to know about are what we call the HPA axis. H is hypothalamus, P is pituitary, and A is adrenal. That axis right there is the main player of the endocrine system, essentially. And it'll make sense as I touch on it later on. Now, here's how I liken it, because your HPA axis is your stress response. I liken the endocrine system to an orchestra. And when I started talking and I said that it's a control, like hormones are a control mechanism to keep you in balance, what your endocrine system is and your hormones is an orchestra. It's balancing you. It's all about balance. It's all about rhythm. And so I liken the hypothalamus of the brain to the composer, right? It writes the messages. The pituitary gland is the conductor. It kind of gets all of the orchestra to play. The pineal gland, which most people forget about, is the clock. It's the rhythm of the composer. And then the orchestra is all downstream organs. The main one is the adrenals, but then the other ones are the thyroid and reproductive organs and pancreas. Now, it's a symphony. And symphonies, to sound good, have to play in order to a rhythm, right? So let's keep going. What type of symptoms will people get when hormones are imbalanced? Now, here's the interesting thing about hormones is all of them give similar symptoms. And so it's really tough to say that this is just this hormone out of balance or just this, because when I start naming them, you're going to see that so many of them cross over. You know, insomnia could be an estrogen issue, but also an insulin or cortisol issue, or even a testosterone issue. And so it's really tough off of symptom just to know exactly what's going on. And you get a good guess off of symptoms for sure, but there's so many similar symptoms among them that you really have to test. Okay, so here's the ones that I wrote down: fatigue, mood issues, weight issues, fertility issues, hair, skin, and nail issues, gut issues, menstrual cycle issues, blood pressure and cholesterol issues, libido, brain fog, headaches, sleep issues, hot flashes, and collagen issues, and bone density issues. Those are the main ones I wrote. There's more beyond that, but you get the picture. Sounds like a lot of people have hormone imbalances because a lot of people experience this, right? So I thought about how I wanted to present this to you guys, and I actually called an audible, and at the last second, I totally flipped script. So after the symptoms, I want to really dive into how Western medicine views hormones. Now, if you guys watch my vaccine video, you'll understand this. And what do you mean by that, Dr. Charlie? What I mean is, remember in the vaccine video when I talked about how all Western medicine preaches is antibodies. And if you remember, the reason why they do that is because that's something they can manipulate. They can change your antibodies, right? But they can't change your innate immune system, which is really what you need, so they don't talk about it. Well, hormones are the same thing because they can manipulate your hormones. Because all a hormone is a message, correct? So they can change the message. Here's the issue with that. Synthetic hormones force the body to do what it needs to do, but it doesn't want to do. We have to figure out why it doesn't want to do that. And that's where my issue lies, is because hormonal imbalances are still a symptom. It is not a cause. But wait, you've even said before hormonal imbalances can cause this. Yes, however, it's not a root cause. It's still a symptom. I'm teaching you how to think through these things. And if the hormone is the message, the goal is to change the messenger. That is a clinical pearl. Write that one down. Okay. We've been programmed to become obsessed with the message when we really should be focusing on the glands, aka the messengers. Okay. So we have to stop asking what is off and ask why it's off. Now, here's my analogy. I have a couple of them. My analogy to our hormone system, our communication system, is FedEx, UPS, USPS, whatever you use. I know all of you have had packages missing, delayed, things like that. So imagine your package is a hormone. If it's delayed, do you blame the package or do you blame the mailing service, which is the messenger or the gland? You blame them. Okay. Now, again, remember from the autoimmune video. Now, this is why I'm doing things in certain orders. I already referenced the vaccine video. Now I'm going to reference the autoimmune video. What did I say in the autoimmune video? The body doesn't make mistakes. We are programmed to thrive. Our ancestors went through plagues and famines and all that type of stuff so that we can have the cream of the crop genetics. So we are programmed to thrive. So what is changing the messenger so that our hormones, our messages are not correct? It's kind of like growing up and playing that telephone game. Remember when you would sit in a giant circle with your friends as kids and you would say a couple sentences and then that person would tell the next person and it would go around and you would see if the message stayed the same. How often did the message stay the same? It didn't. Did the message change or did the messenger change the message? Clinical pearl. All right, so let's start talking about what I call the three kings of hormones. Now we're going to get into my take on hormones. I just talked about how Western medicine views hormones. Now it's my turn. Okay, so the three kings of hormones. These three hormones are pretty much the cause of every other hormonal imbalance. Okay? Cortisol, which is our stress hormone. This, in my opinion, is the main player. I think that this is the king of all kings. Cortisol and what affects it is usually the root cause of hormonal imbalances. The next one is insulin. Insulin is from the pancreas, okay? But insulin is also secreted when you're in survival mode, and I'll get into that. The last one is estrogens. Notice how I said it plural, because estrogen is singular, but there's multiple types of estrogen. So you have to view it as a family, as estrogens. And those are secreted from your ovaries and testes, which a lot of people don't know, and your adrenals. So those are the top three: cortisol, insulin, and estrogens, even though estrogens is technically more than one. Now, which gland did I say multiple times there? The adrenal gland. Now, I'm setting this all up to make sense in further sections of this video, but I already talked about the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. I'm going to keep saying this over and over because repetition is the father of learning, and the more you hear it, the more it sticks. So let's talk about cortisol, which is from the adrenals. Cortisol issues will give people an apple-shaped body, okay? So insulin and cortisol give people more of an apple shape. Low vitamin D goes along with cortisol. Blood pressure and cholesterol issues go with cortisol. Rosacea and vitiligo go with cortisol because cortisol influences your melanin. Allergies, chronic allergies go with cortisol and adrenals. Insomnia, reactivated and chronic viruses, because when cortisol, which is stress hormone, is raised, your immune system goes down. Here's the clinical pearl on that. It takes vitamin C to create cortisol. And when that's up, you have no vitamin C, your thymus gland does not function properly. And then you are set up for viral infections. That's a clinical pearl. Salt cravings, exhaustion. And here's one that I've experienced personally, is tired and wired. So the people who wake up, they're okay, they're a little tired. In the afternoon, they start fatiguing after lunch. And then when they get home at night, they're wired. They want to do everything. They're opposite of tired. So tired and wired is an adrenal cortisol pattern. I'm plugging along on this, folks. Insulin. So sugar cravings. This is still the same apple-shaped body. Fatty liver. Skin tags. A lot of people ask me on Instagram about skin tags. I always say a blood sugar issue. Sleep apnea. Energy issues. Crashing after meals. What else I put? Cysts. I'm going to talk about PCOS next week. Cysts on your breast also have an insulin component. Now let's go to estrogen. Mood issues, hot flashes, libido, vaginal dryness, cysts again. Now, estrogen gives people a pear shape, so more hips wide, whereas cortisol and insulin give more the belly wide. Any cycle issue, heavy periods or no periods. Fluid retention, which a lot of people asking about as well, is an estrogen metabolism issue. And then headaches with cycle. Now, I wrote this down. I think this is pretty important. I don't want you to get so focused on, is it hyper or hypo? Like, is it too much cortisol or too little cortisol? Is it too much insulin, too little? The reason why is because I want you to take a step back and from a bird's eye view, look at the full picture. If you start just balancing that with herbals and different lifestyle stuff, you're not getting usually to the root cause. So we need to take a bird's eye view and look at the glands. We're going to be talking about the glands quite a bit, right? Western medicine talks about the message. You and I are going to talk about the messengers which create and send the message. So what affects the adrenals, basically the HPA axis, the pancreas, the ovaries? Well, in my experience, 99% of the time, when I use vial testing and I use my hand modes, and I'm really diving into the body's, what we call the biocomputer, and asking, why are these hormones off? 99% of the time, it's actually an inflammation issue that leads to a detoxification issue. I don't remember the last time that when I was dealing with hormones with patients, it was a lack of production, which goes exactly against what we do with bioidenticals and synthetic hormones, is we give the message, but I find that it's not a production issue. Usually it is them being shut down by a detoxification issue with inflammation. That right there, you can take to the bank. You need to understand that. It is crucial to understand that. All right. So what clogs detoxification? What adds to inflammation? Well, here's the main, I think I wrote down 5. Number 1, dysbiosis. What is dysbiosis? That is bad microbiome of the gut. So parasites, yeast, viruses, bacteria, spirochetes like Lyme, things like that. Now, in my experience, the most common by far with hormonal issues is a candida yeast infection and overgrowth and fungus, by far. The reason why that is because yeast feeds on estrogen, and we are such an estrogen dominant society. So yeast is absolutely first. Here's my next clinical pearl. And Dr. V is looking down at me while I say this because I learned this from him. Parasites are the second most common, maybe even just as common as yeast, but not because of the estrogen metabolism. It's because parasites make you anemic. And I can hear Dr. V now screaming, check anemia, because parasites eat your iron. And I'll say it later on too, because you got to hear this multiple times. What carries hormones? Blood. Right there. So many people miss that, because that's like, you can have a great messenger, you can have a great message, but the road's under construction. You ain't going nowhere. So anemia is so big when it comes to hormones because it's transportation method. And parasites, why do you think I started with parasite video? Because when you fix anemia, a lot of times hormones will start regulating, but the cause is usually parasites because they eat your iron. Unless you are on a diet that is not high in iron or you're not absorbing your good animal protein. Now, moving along on dysbiosis. Dysbiosis leads to what we call leaky gut. Now let's reference the autism video. See, these all build on each other. In the autism video, I said leaky gut and dysbiosis creates lipopolysaccharides, right? LPS, which is a neurotoxin. Well, then LPS gets into the blood and creates systemic inflammation. Now, systemic inflammation builds fat cells, and now fat cells actually produce estrogen on their own. So you're more estrogen dominant, feeding a yeast infection. Do you see how this works? This is why I preach infections all the time. And when you're hearing me on my stories, and I'm sure some people are like, man, he's really saying parasites for a lot of stuff. Man, he really says fungus a lot. This is why, is because we're looking for zebras. We're looking for this random little whatever to try to fix your issue when we should be looking for horses, the main players. Now, this is a big clinical pearl too. I know this is loaded with clinical pearls, but I need to point out when you need to write something down. The reason why dysbiosis, again, is so important, especially for hormones, because technically dysbiosis is important for everything. Every video I talk about is going to have dysbiosis in some fashion because it's tied into everything. But what happens is your liver detoxes toxic hormones out, right? It's called conjugation. It makes the estrogen able to go through the bile and excrete it into the blood, or into the bowel, excuse me. What bad microbes in the gut will do is get a hold of that conjugated estrogen and unbind it and push it back into the circulation. Here's the issue with that. It just undid all of the liver's work. And now that recirculating estrogen binds to your receptors and then blocks the good estrogen from getting into those receptors. Now your labs will say, oh yeah, there's enough estrogen, but it is not the same estrogen. It is toxic estrogen, and it will not have the same function. It will still be estrogen dominance, even though on your blood work, it says your estrogen is normal. Big clinical pearl right there. I'm going to talk a little more about it with estrogen, or with liver too, because the next one is liver, which is bombarded by toxins. I wrote down birth control. Birth control feeds yeast infections like crazy. Steroid use, chronic yeast infections with steroid use, and that also destroys your calcium metabolism. Pesticides, gluten. Even if you're not gluten sensitive, gluten will actually reduce something called cytosine, not cytosine. Why am I having a blank? P450, cytochrome P450, which is a enzyme for the liver for phase 2 detox that helps, and phase 1 and phase 2, which helps get rid of toxicity. Gluten downregulates that enzyme, so now you can't detox properly. Blood sugar dysregulation is absolutely huge. It leads to fatty liver. And blood sugar dysregulation goes with the next ones, insulin and cortisol, that I'm going to touch on. Mold and xenoestrogens, which is estrogen mimicking things from the environment. So fragrances, beauty products, all the stuff, chemtrail, all the stuff that we're bombarded with. Children's plastic toys, plastic bags that you use, plastic water bottles, all of that stuff clogs the liver and clogs your receptor sites for estrogen. These also, xenoestrogens, are fat soluble. And so what that does is it stores in your fat just like a hormone does and completely dysregulates everything. Now, if your liver is bombarded with toxins, you won't get a full conjugation. You'll get a partial conjugation of toxic estrogen. So that partial conjugation will also, instead of going into the gut, will also get into the bloodstream and clog the receptors and make it seem like your estrogen's normal and hormones normal, but you have toxic versions in the receptors that have a different function. Now, another thing is you've watched the methylation video. Where does 80% of methylation happen? In the liver. Specifically, the two genes that we're talking about is the MTHFR, right? With the SAMe. We can go back to the video and watch that. And then the COMT gene, which is how we degrade estrogen properly. All right, next one, insulin, blood sugar, but it's really a survival mechanism. Why do you say that? I say that because in times of high blood sugar, insulin is secreted. And usually what happens in our society is we marinate in cortisol and stress hormone. And what stress hormone does is make the liver and muscle dump sugar into the blood. Because in times of stress, your blood sugar is usually low, cortisol gets released and adrenaline. That sends a message to your liver to increase your blood sugar. So if you have high cortisol, you're going to have high blood sugar. The pancreas releases insulin to tame that blood sugar. And it all started because of a stress response. Now, doesn't mean that diet doesn't have a role. Diet absolutely has a role. But even if you eat clean and you're stressed out, or down the road, I'll talk about infections, you will still have this pattern. Now, going along, everyone calls it the SAD diet, the standard American diet. That will constantly spike your insulin. The wrong exercise will spike your insulin. If you train too hard, you're going to throw your stress hormone out of balance, which stress hormone and insulin are on a teeter-totter. Now, one other one that is absolutely everywhere in society is protein deficiency. People's digestive tracts are so toxic that they can't even digest the protein that they're feeding themselves. Now, what I'll say is you got to have animal protein. You just have to. I find that if you don't have animal protein in your diet, you break down over time. And this is a big reason why, is because animal protein gives you fat and protein. Protein and fat, they balance your blood sugar, but they also is what hormones are made out of, cholesterol. We've been taught to demonize cholesterol and give you statins, but if you have no cholesterol, you don't make any hormones. And so that's a pretty big issue. Now, if we're protein deficient, like if our stomach doesn't have enough acid, which I'll get into when I'm talking about treatments, kind of what to do, you'll be protein deficient, obviously. However, here's a clinical pearl. Similar to how I said that cortisol raises your blood sugar because it also releases here's the mechanism. When cortisol and adrenaline get released from stress, it tells the liver, or it tells the pancreas to release glucagon. So the pancreas releases either insulin or glucagon. Glucagon is a hormone that then goes to the liver and allows it to start dumping sugar into the blood to raise your blood sugar. That's a survival mechanism. Now, what else stimulates glucagon without having to spike your cortisol is animal protein. So when you have good animal protein and you digest your protein, your blood sugar stabilizes because it releases glucagon not in survival mode. Clinical pearl. Now, the next thing on insulin is in the presence of a bunch of insulin. So blood sugar dysregulation and stress response, you'll have a ton of insulin. It's called aromatase. And what that means is in the presence of insulin, especially in men, it will convert your testosterone to estrogen. And now you have low T and estrogen dominance and prostate issues and things like that. In females, aromatase will take their estrogen and convert it to testosterone, which is PCOS and cysts. That is where insulin is an absolute monster, is the aromatase issue. So that is a big clinical pearl. Next, adrenal health. Now, we talked about cortisol, and the reason why I'm so obsessed with infections is because what happens is when you have a chronic infection, your body will secrete cortisol to fight that infection off. So if you have chronic parasites, chronic viruses, bacteria, or yeast, each day your body's secreting more cortisol, more cortisol, more cortisol until your blood sugar's up, your insulin comes now. Now insulin turns your testosterone into estrogen or estrogen into testosterone if you're a female. You see how this pattern happens. And so that is the biggest reason, one of the biggest reasons why I go after pathogens is because it helps stabilize your stress hormone. Now, here's the mechanism that happens. If you are constantly secreting cortisol, then you are going to deplete your progesterone. The reason why is because from pregnenolone, which is from cholesterol, so we need good fish oil, we need good essential fats, right, to have good cholesterol. It either goes down to progesterone and down to cortisol. If you are pushing that cortisol pathway, you are depleting the building blocks needed to create progesterone. Now everyone becomes estrogen dominant because progesterone and estrogen are on a teeter-totter. They call it the pregnenolone steal. When you're pushing your cortisol so much, you will deplete your progesterone. And now you have PMS, right? I'll get more into clinical pearls at the end, talking about PMS and how after you ovulate, after ovulation until your cycle is a complete progesterone pattern. Anything that happens there is a progesterone issue, which is when PMS happens. However, it's always going to be an excess estrogen that is giving you the symptom of low progesterone. I talked about this already. People who are tired and then wired is an adrenal pattern. And the adrenals are the main player of the orchestra that regulates your HPA axis because stress hormone, cortisol, will go back to the hypothalamus and pituitary and shut them down. Now that they're not composing music and the conductor's not working, now it's not telling your thyroid to work properly, your ovaries. That's why I say that the adrenals are the rate limiting step of the HPA axis. And something just popped in my head that I need to tell you, this is how my mind works, is the rate limiting step to your hormones is blood deficiency, because that's the road to get the message down. So anemia and things like that are the rate limiting step to your hormones. Clinical Pearl. All right. And then the last thing, just think of it this way. A zebra running from a lion has to shunt all of its blood to its muscles to run faster. That is what cortisol will do, is it will shunt blood to your muscles because you're in fight or flight. But what that does is take blood away from your vital organs, your ovaries, your adrenals. Now your hormones are going to be in shock, right? And so when zebras are escaping a lion, then they go back into rest and digest parasympathetic, right? They just chill. Humans don't do that because we live in the human experience. We have family stress, work stress, personal stress, tragic, whatever we have, we don't just disconnect. And that is a big reason why humans aren't as healthy as we could be. All right, last thing that affects hormone imbalance, xenoestrogens. I already talked about this quite a bit, and that they're fat soluble, right? So they get in our fat in our cells and they clog receptors. Now, they also change methylation and the genetic expression, because that's what methylation does, of fertility and reproduction. And so there's BPA, there's plastics, there's glyphosate and pesticides and herbicides. There's all that type of stuff in our environment. And so we're bombarded with it. Birth control, fragrances, I said, chemtrails, personal care items, all that stuff will absolutely destroy hormone balances. So next, how do you test for hormones? Well, my two favorite are vial testing. Like I have all of them in vials that I will put up to the body and see what is in balance and what is not, right? It just tells me if there's a roadblock. But the gold standard is a Dutch test, which is usually saliva or urine. So a Dutch test, you can get it online. They will do a full steroid hormone panel and all the different hormones. It's a good idea to get one if you want to see where your cortisol's at, your estrogen, and all that type of stuff. So Dutch, I'd say, is gold standard. In my world, vial testing is gold standard with muscle testing and hand moding. You already know I'm going to say that. because that's what changed my life. And that's how I'm able, as Versandol would say, to bless people. Okay, last thing. So what do we do? All right, dysbiosis. The most common infection that I find, you already know that I said it, is yeast. My go-to for yeast is Golden Thread Supreme. Now, if you are pregnant or breastfeeding, flip that to Scutellaria Supreme. It's also, Golden Thread is really bitter. It's really strong. So for kids, you can also give them the Scutellaria tincture for yeast infections. And then I throw in two other things. I throw in Morinda Supreme because Morinda is a very broad spectrum, gentle herb that doesn't taste bad. You can throw it in kids' drinks and smoothies and stuff. It's very broad spectrum, but it is really good for fungal. And so I've been using it quite a bit, especially for kids. And in my Q&As, I talk about it with the ear, nose, and throat infections. Morinda is great. Morinda was Supreme Nutrition's first product. And so I don't talk about it enough, but I would throw it in there. So Golden Thread or Scutellaria and Morinda. And my third one, which is going to be the highlight of this whole treatment part of the video, is black cumin oil from Vervita. It is antifungal, anti-toxic estrogen, anti-fibroid, anti-parasitic, builds your blood, gives you B vitamins, give you essential fats, which builds hormones, has a little bit of iron in it. So black cumin oil is what Versandol would use, along with one more, which I'll get to next, to build the blood of people. And he would always preach, if you want to go after hormones, build their blood up. Parasites, obviously, I talked about how it can cause you to be anemic, and then that changes your blood. You can watch the parasite video. One more that I will add on top of the parasite video is for pregnancy and breastfeeding. I've been using Elysium Supreme more than any other ones. So you can add that in there. And then the last thing I wrote down is red light. I've been talking about fringe red light. Red light actually helps your good microbiome grow. And so you can literally put it over your belly and it goes through your skin and the good pathogens will thrive. So that's a big one too. And not a lot of people talk about that, but very, very, very helpful. Next, build healthy blood. So get rid of parasites, but the absolute number one, black cumin oil. You can take it orally, even though on the bottle it says not to. That's just legality purposes. But I take it orally many times. My wife, my patients, tastes like cumin, right? Like taco seasoning. I say start at like 1 to 5 drops and then go up to about 10 drops a day. You can put it on the back of your hand and lick it like I do. If it's too strong, put it in water, just shoot it. You can, what I'll have some of my patients do after their cycle when they lose blood, besides eat red meat, is I will have them bathe with 20 to 60 drops of black cumin oil with Epsom salt and actually get it in through their skin to rebuild their blood. The next one is Immune Armor. Now, Immune Armor builds your blood so well. That and black cumin oil together is a win-win. Now, you've all heard me talk about Immune Armor for immune system, but again, what organ recycles your red blood cells and builds your blood? Your spleen. Immune Armor has spleen tissue in there. And so black cumin and Immune Armor together, phenomenal. And then one more I wrote down is chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is like plant blood. So if you eat chlorophyll, it builds your blood. And the source that I will recommend is called Wild Greens, which is a powder from Supreme you can mix in a smoothie and drink. This one is twofold. This one has chlorophyll content, but it also is greens that help your liver detox xenoestrogens. So that's a pretty good one to throw in some of your morning shakes and stuff like that as well. They've done it with very hypoallergenic greens. So like no wheatgrass, no alfalfa. It has like dandelion and nettles and stuff like that. So really, really good for getting rid of those xenoestrogens and building your blood. Next is liver methylation. InspireCell immediately. Get your methylation going. I talked a little bit about the COMT gene. I'll talk more about that when I talk about xenoestrogens, but get your methylation going. For pesticides and herbicides, Takasumi Supreme. Same thing I talk about for the chemtrails. You've heard me say that a ton. If you know there's glyphosate or Roundup being sprayed, then Takasumi can help that for sure. But the product that was designed for it was Glypho-X. And then everyone knows my favorite two for liver health, Golden Thread Supreme and Schisandra Supreme. So InspireCell, and Schisandra are probably my top two for liver. But Golden Thread does the yeast. You're about to see it does the insulin, and it does liver. It also does gallbladder, which I'll get to as well. It stabilizes your blood sugar, which I'll talk about too. And then last but not least, what's the rate limiting step of the liver? The bile flow. What product have I just preached about forever? Artichoke. Why do people get pregnant and better cycles and stuff on artichoke? Because it is getting the bile to flow better and getting rid of that toxic estrogen. It is not like DIM and I3C and calcium D-glucarate, which has a very strong affinity for estrogen. All artichoke is doing is getting your body to work more efficiently. And I prefer that more than nutraceuticals like DIM and all that stuff. If you are pregnant, then I switch it over to rosemary. Some people do better with rosemary. Rosemary is very good at helping get toxic estrogen through the liver properly, and also helps regulate blood sugar too. Now, more on blood sugar. How do we balance insulin? Diet in protein and fat, and a little bit of carbohydrates in vegetable form. That right there helps from a diet standpoint. But you have to regulate cortisol, right? Like we have to go after infections and emotional stress, which is like the FAST tool that my first video was on, because that helps regulate your emotions. But insulin and cortisol is a survival mechanism. Many people don't view it that way, but you have to view it that way because it's exactly what it is. Now, on top of eating good fats and protein, red meat is phenomenal. What can you take to balance your blood sugar? Here's my top three. Golden Thread Supreme. By the end of this video, you're going to know that Golden Thread Supreme is powerful, and so is black cumin oil, because the number 2 is black cumin oil, balances blood sugar, and number 3 is Regenerzyme Heart. Those are my top 3 for diabetes. Those are my top 3 for insulin issues. But you also have to take it a step further, and you have to digest your protein and fat, because protein and fat make hormones. Fat is cholesterol. Cholesterol makes your steroid hormones. And so that's crucial. Now, how do you digest protein and fat more efficiently? You have to make sure your cortisol is regulated, because as your stress hormone goes up, your stomach acid goes down. Clinical Pearl. Now, do the FAST tool for all that stuff and essential oils and however you help regulate your emotional stress. But then going after the infections, because that's what I said. Number 1 was dysbiosis, will also help your cortisol, which will help your stomach acid. GastroDigest from Vervita, my favorite digestive enzyme. If you want to start taking that with meals to help, totally good with that. But gallbladder is such an important organ that everyone misses. I've preached about gallbladder all the time. I will probably do a whole video on gallbladder. But the main ones I use for gallbladder are Bodyguard Supreme. GastroDigest has some enzymes that help gallbladder. Artichoke, which I talk about all the time. Those are probably my top 3. My 4th, what do you know? Golden Thread, because Golden Thread is so bitter that it helps the bile flow more efficiently. To a lesser degree, I don't really use it that much, but some people have had great success with Cellcore TUDCA. That's in my store as well. All this stuff you can find in my store. Like Golden Thread is, and Bodyguard is Supreme. GastroDigest is Vervita. Artichoke is AMG Naturals. TUDCA is Cellcore. Now, let's go to the next. How do we regulate cortisol? My number 1 herb is Schisandra. It gets the liver detoxing. It helps regulate your cortisol. That is a win-win for hormone regulation. Absolute win-win. De-stress with the FAST tool. I already talked about that. Proper workouts. Don't overtrain. And then infections, because again, chronic infection will lead to chronic cortisol excretion, and that's what breaks you down when you marinate in cortisol. I wrote here for low adrenals. So if you've been secreting cortisol so long, your body will stop secreting it over time, known as adrenal fatigue, which I will do a video on, but that's low cortisol exhaustion. For that is Regenerzyme Adrenal from Vervita. That, along with Schisandra, because Schisandra is an adaptogen, it can really help regulate your cortisol. That's a win-win. One more that is kind of a gold standard for cortisol regulation that I don't use as much as Schisandra, but it has helped people, is ashwagandha. The reason why I don't use it a whole bunch is because it is a nightshade, and a lot of people are nightshade sensitive, but I've had people who are nightshade sensitive do totally fine on ashwagandha and do really well. So if you're going to try 2 different adaptogens for your cortisol, do Schisandra and ashwagandha from Supreme. Last is, I think it's last. Yep, is xenoestrogens. We get rid of xenoestrogens through methylation. So helping that liver with Schisandra and Inspiracell, I already talked about that. Again, the wild greens helps the greens help with that detox of the liver. Takasumi helps absorb that. And then artichoke and rosemary help that too. And then the last thing I wrote down is iodine, because iodine is what helps that COMT gene function, which is how you the methylation process of getting rid of estrogen. I use iodoral, which is in my full script. And then red meat, because red meat gives you methionine and magnesium, which creates SAMe, which, if you remember from my methylation video, is the universal methyl donor. You can take SAMe if you want, but I prefer to get it through animal protein. All right, so that's the whole video. I am going to give you a little bonus section. I have about a page and a half of just straight clinical pearls. And then we will touch base again next week on endometriosis, fibroids, estrogen and progesterone imbalance with fertility and menstrual cycle. All right. Number one clinical pearl. The three most healthy foods that are hormone shifting, so I'm not a huge fan of them, are dairy, eggs, and caffeine. Now, eggs are hit or miss for people. For some people, it helps them significantly, but eggs are what they culture viruses and bacteria on in labs. So if they can do that in a lab, what does it do in your gut? That was a Versandal thing. He's the one who made me start thinking this way. Dairy, obviously raw is better, but dairy really affects the ovaries. And then caffeine will never allow you to stabilize your cortisol. So that's the mechanism of there. A lot of people ask me about hormone replacement therapy. The only time that I will recommend that, and sometimes I'll try my hardest not to, is if you have changed your hardware, which means you've had a hysterectomy or you've taken out your uterus with your ovaries. Then you need bioidenticals. Bioidenticals is more lock and key. Some people, are big fans of it in the functional med world. Other people say it causes cancer in the long run. I'm kind of in the middle, leaning a little more to the bad in the long run, because a lot of people, if you've had your hardware removed, I totally get it. But what we are working on with Herb Stuff is the software. And so if your hardware is not there, then you need that pharmaceutical, that bioidentical hormone. But if you don't have those removed, by now you see that just throwing more hormones into the picture is not getting to the root cause. It might change your symptom momentarily until that cause turns into a different symptom. But the only time that I will say, okay, I'm all right with it, is if you've had your hardware removed. Here's a big clinical pearl. Adrenals is the only gland when you're born that is full size, adult size, as a baby. My 2-month-old in the other room has full-sized adrenals, which is crazy. And they are the same tissue when you're in utero as your ovaries or testes. And when you're born or as you're developing, they split. Your testes and ovaries descend and your adrenals go on top of your kidneys. So treat the adrenals to affect the ovaries. Now, this is also why people who have the worst menopause transition are the ones whose adrenals have been the most taxed, who have the worst cortisol patterns. Because all menopause is your ovaries stop working and your adrenals take over. And so if the adrenals have been an issue, you're going to get bad symptoms when they're going to be the main players in your estrogen metabolism or production. And so here's a pattern that I'll see is people who are pregnant have really bad adrenals. They will feed on the babies that are adult sized, which will then make sometimes people feel better in pregnancy from a hormone standpoint. And the baby will actually be born prone to allergies and stuff because their adrenals have been leached the whole time in pregnancy. And then when you give birth and your adrenals have to start working again, you go into postpartum depression. That's a big clinical pearl. That's why when I do my my prenatal, I always do Regenerzyme Heart, because it supports your heart, which I'll talk about in a second, but it also has adrenal tissue in there. So it actually helps not have to pull from the babies and builds a healthier baby. And then postpartum, you don't get that depression. Now, for the menopause shift, here's what I usually tell people to do. Number 1, Regenerzyme Adrenal. 2, Chase Tree Supreme. 3, Artichoke. 4 in my full script is from standard process called Simplex F, which is just pituitary tissue, adrenal, and thyroid and ovaries. So it actually just gives you glands. That's when we talk about glands. This is how you manipulate glands. Medications manipulate the message. They do not manipulate the glands, which is what we need to do. And so that's what these nutrients are doing. Regenerozyme adrenal changes the gland, the adrenal gland. And then another one that I'll do is from Vervita is called Natural Balancing Cream. It's a wild yam that helps produce good estrogen and testosterone and progesterone. I will have females rub it into their thighs or into their glutes instead of on their wrists and stuff, because you have to put it where fat is, because then it's more absorbed properly and not so fastly absorbed or quickly absorbed. So that's called Natural Balancing Cream. All right. DHEA gives good estrogen, which helps with the hot flashes, especially in the menopause change, and that's found in Regenerozyme Adrenal. DHEA also helps counteract that high cortisol. High estrogen shuts down the conversion of thyroid hormone, which affects every single cell because every cell in your body has a thyroid receptor. So when you are estrogen dominant, you're literally affecting every cell because it's stopping proper thyroid hormone. People who have remember how I said that hormones are like a big detoxification issue? Well, thyroid is usually a detoxification issue too, which turns into a conversion issue. It's never usually a thyroid issue. And people who have cold hands and cold feet, that's a clinical pearl for thyroid hormone is not being converted from T4 to T3, which 80% of that happens in the liver, 20% in the kidneys, which goes back to infections usually. See, I'm telling you, there's a method to my madness. In menopause, your estrogen drops, but your progesterone drops even more drastically. And so that's where hot flashes and stuff will come. The supplements I named above is exactly what I would do. And this is pretty big. Oftentimes, the balance of your hormones is greater for your body than the quantity. So I'd rather you have a good progesterone to estrogen balance instead of having high levels and imbalanced. So that's a pretty big thing. Big one too. I'll talk about some of these next week in the estrogen video, but estrogen dominance increases mast cell sensitivity. So you will actually get a way more histamine response much sooner. If something is, when I say sensitivity, it means it requires less stimulus to fire. And so you get way more histamine in the body with a lot of estrogen. Estrogen is produced by fat cells. And so medications actually influence the fat, which changes the message, and it doesn't really influence the gland. So losing weight will shed inflammation, will shed estrogen producing cells. Let's see. Estrogen dominance, when it stops your cycle from happening, you won't release progesterone. So that will create low progesterone. So even if you have low progesterone, it's usually always an estrogen dominance issue. Vitamin E helps produce progesterone. And if you have high prolactin levels, that's a vitamin E need. That's found in Immune Armor. Again, remember Versandol, black cumin, and Immune Armor together. Great for hormone balancing. Recurrent miscarriages, octocosanol, which is found in, I don't know how to pronounce it, Bioxytol Forte from Biotic. So Bioxytol Forte, Bioctasol Forte, actually helps the sugar metabolism of the uterus. So recurrent miscarriages, if you've already checked your thyroid and clotting factors, try some Bioxytol to help that sugar metabolism of the uterus. Chronic UTIs could be a low good estrogen issue, so estrogen dominance again. What helps that is fennel, which is in Immune Armor. Imagine that. Versandol's genius again. This one I'll talk about next week. Dopamine stimulates luteinizing hormone, which increases your progesterone. Dopamine is made from tyrosine, which is found in red meat, and you need good digestion to absorb that amino acid. So it all goes back to dysbiosis and digestion. All right, almost done, guys. This is longer than I expected, but that's okay. You guys can go back and watch this over and over. If you have any luteal phase issues, so your cycle, right, you ovulate, from ovulation to your cycle is luteal phase, that's your progesterone phase. If you have any issues during that, try Chaste Tree and Inspiracel. Thyroid hormone sensitizes your cells to progesterone. So again, if your thyroid hormone isn't working properly, your progesterone won't work properly. And thyroid hormone is usually a liver congestion issue. So again, all the stuff I've named will usually take care of most of these clinical pearls. Another clinical pearl for hot flashes, gamma erosinol is a nutrient, and then methyl donors. And what do you know? Versandol, again, he created InspireCell. InspireCell has gamma erosinol in it, and it also is MTHFR donor. And then last but not least, this is a huge Versandol pearl. Versandol, as I said in the beginning, preached about hormones, but he preached about the heart. And he would say that everything, your brain, and especially your endocrine system, your adrenals, are a backup, a generator to a heart that's been broken and stressed. Now, it doesn't mean just heart disease. I'm talking any stress in your life. The first organ that gets hit is your heart. When the heart gets overwhelmed, remember what organ holds your emotions. The first video, the bladder, kidney bladder, right? However, when that's overwhelmed, you'll start getting immune system stuff, but your adrenals will go into overdrive. And so we have to balance the heart. Now, here's some good clinical pearls about the heart. It's 5,000 times more, or produces 5,000 times more energy than your brain. That's how strong the heart is. It has 40,000 neurons, which means it has its own nervous system. Your heart has its own nervous system, and it sends more signals to the brain than vice versa. Think about that. Your brain is your nervous system, right? It's supposed to control everything. Your heart actually sends more signals to your brain than your brain does to your heart. So it's actually more important, which brings me to my next point. Your heart is the first organ that is created way before your brain's created. It's also the last organ to work. You can be brain dead, but you cannot be heart dead, right? They can place you in a coma, but if your heart's done, you're done. And so we have to take care of our heart. I wanted to start this video talking about Dr. Versandol, and I'm ending it talking about Dr. Versandol. Without him, I wouldn't have had this type of knowledge. And so the best way to bless the heart is those SRT optimizers, which I talked about in the autism video, that was made to literally balance the heart energy. That is what Versandol created them for. And then his main two nutrients or supplements that balance the heart is Regenerozyme Heart and InspireCell. Why do you think so many people get good results with InspireCell? It's methylation, but it's beyond. It's helping that heart. And when the heart and brain are connected, miracles happen. When the heart and brain are connected, your cortisol can regulate. And when your cortisol regulates, your hormones regulate. I will leave you off with that. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will see y'all next week talking about estrogen and endometriosis and PCOS and fertility stuff. Share this with whoever needs to hear it because hormonal imbalances are everywhere. But remember, it is a symptom, not a cause. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you all in the trenches.